So you want to know more about localism?
It's more than just, those buy local signs you see everywhere?
Right.
We're going deep on this one, folks, like
Yeah.
really deep.
We're talking about a whole political philosophy.
Historical context.
It's really interesting stuff. Like, you might see your community totally differently after this.
What I find so fascinating about localism is how it makes you rethink things you just take for granted.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we're so used to these big systems, right?
Yeah.
Global trade, national politics, huge cities.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that people lived in much smaller communities for most of human history.
It's like we hit fast forward on everything.
And maybe missed a turn somewhere along the way.
Maybe. It's a good question to ask. To get localism, though, you can't just look at the economics or the social side.
There's more to it.
Oh, yeah. Think about subsidiarity.
Subsidiary now.
Subsidiarity. It means decisions should be made at the most local level possible.
Okay.
Empowering communities to control their own destinies,
Instead of someone miles away making decisions that affect their daily lives.
Exactly.
Makes sense, especially with how those big systems you mentioned can have downsides.
The stuff you sent actually mentioned Alice Waters.
Oh, right.
And how she pushed for local food back in the 1970s.
Was that just a food fad, or was there something more going on?
Well, it definitely went along with people becoming more aware of where their food came from and wanting sustainable agriculture.
Sure.
But it also tapped into a growing worry about the downsides of industrial farming.
Not just the environment, but also how small farms are being pushed out.
So it wasn't just what we were eating.
Right.
It was the whole system.
Yes.
Which brings us to a big point.
Localism is about more than just economics.
It's true.
It's tied to political ideas, too.
Yeah.
The research mentions anarchism, bioregionalism, environmentalism. It's a lot.
What connects all of those is this belief in local independence and being self-sufficient.
Okay.
Like bioregionalism, it emphasizes living in harmony with nature in a specific area.
Kind of like those small farms working with their environment, not against it.
So instead of saying you're a citizen of a country, you'd be a citizen of, say, the Mississippi River Basin.
Exactly.
You're prioritizing that ecosystem over everything else.
It's about recognizing how everything is connected within that region.
Right.
And that we've got to live sustainably within those limits, which naturally leads to localism.
Because if you're saying the health of your bioregion is super important to you,
Right.
you're more likely to make choices that'll protect it long term.
Like buying local food, consuming less, supporting policies that protect those unique ecosystems.
And that's where localism can clash with globalization.
Oh, how so?
Well, globalization has connected us in amazing ways, no doubt.
Right.
But it's also created a disconnect between the people making decisions and the communities dealing with the consequences. Localism is about giving that power back to the local level.
It's like we're trying to balance the good of being globally connected with the need for local communities to be strong and resilient on their own.
That's a tough one. What do you think?
It's about finding that balance, and that's when things get really interesting.
It's not about rejecting globalization entirely or going into isolation. It's about looking at what parts of globalization truly benefit us and what parts might be doing more harm than good.
I see.
And then we can use that knowledge to make better choices about how we live and work and how we interact with the world.
Exactly.
It's not about us versus them. It's more like realizing that what we do locally actually impacts things globally.
Yes.
And maybe, just maybe, if we focus on strengthening our own communities and making them better.
We can start to build a global system that is fairer and more sustainable for everyone.
I love that. And here's something else, this idea of localism. It's not just a Western thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's gaining traction in developing countries too, though it looks a little different.
The stuff I read mentioned how some people in developing nations see localism as a way to break free from global trade systems they feel are rigged against them.
Exactly. They see it as a way to take back control of their economies, support their local businesses and farmers, and protect their culture.
All while facing these powerful global forces, pushing for everyone to be the same.
It's kind of like flipping the script on that, saying,
You know, think globally, act locally.
I hear you. We can't ignore what's happening globally, right?
Right.
But strong local communities. That's how we build a world that's actually fair to everyone.
So if we take that idea a bit further.
The research does bring up some criticisms of localism.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the downsides? Like, what are people worried about?
One big one is that being super strict about localism could actually hold back economic growth, especially in developing countries.
Because they need to export.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's also the argument, and George Monbiot talks about this, that even if it's not perfect, global trade is still really important for developing nations.
So it's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
How do you make sure communities have the freedom to thrive?
But also, still benefit from global trade and everything that comes with that.
It's the big question, isn't it? And it goes beyond just economics.
Oh, how?
Some critics worry that if communities only focus inward, they become too isolated.
Oh, I see.
Like, by focusing just on the local, we miss the bigger picture.
And forget about our responsibility to deal with global issues together.
So we're always trying to find that balance, huh?
Constantly.
Between the local and the global,
Yeah.
trying to make both work.
That's where thinking critically comes in, and having these nuanced perspectives.
It's not about localism being the only right answer.
It's a way to look at our values, our choices, and how they affect everything around us.
Speaking of impact.
The material talks about localism being used for social justice.
Oh, for sure.
Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. Localism often goes together with movements for social and economic justice.
Because it challenges those systems that create oppression and inequality.
Which often operate on a larger scale, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you shift that power to the local level,
Okay.
you create more opportunities for marginalized groups to actually have a voice.
Because they have more control over what happens in their own community.
Right. They have more say over the resources, the economy, their future.
And what often happens is you see a fair distribution of wealth, of opportunity, of well-being in general.
A community might decide to create their own local currency, for example.
That's a great example.
That keeps money within the community, supporting their own, instead of big corporations somewhere else.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a real chance.
Not just some.
Yeah.
Everyone.
And it's not just about money, right?
Right. It impacts more than that.
Localism can also be huge for environmental justice.
How so?
When communities are connected to their local environment.
They're more likely to fight for policies that protect it.
From pollution, destruction, that kind of thing.
All of it.
Which reminds me of that quote from the stuff we read.
All politics is local. Tip O'Neill. Right.
Yeah, and it reminds us that even issues that seem global.
Climate change.
Exactly.
They start with decisions made locally.
So we're not just bystanders. We're part of this.
We have to be.
And our actions, even small ones, can make a difference.
That's the whole point. Localism shows us we can make a difference. It's not about waiting for someone else to fix everything.
It's about taking action ourselves.
Exactly.
And the material does mention real-world examples, like those community gardens and locally owned businesses we see popping up everywhere.
What are some other ways we see localism happening today?
Have you heard of the transition movement?
I don't think so.
So it's this global network of communities.
Okay.
And they're all working to become more resilient, especially with climate change and economic uncertainty.
How does that work?
So they call themselves transition towns a lot of the time.
And they focus on bringing essential things back to the local level, like food production, energy, transportation. They'll have community gardens, renewable energy co-ops, local food networks, all to make them more self-sufficient.
So it's like they're building a future that's better equipped to handle whatever comes their way.
Exactly.
And this is happening everywhere, not just in small towns.
Right. Even big cities are seeing this. Urban farming's a big one.
I have seen that.
Community-owned energy projects, local currencies, to keep the wealth local.
It's amazing how this idea of localism is being used in so many ways.
It's really cool.
And it shows that there isn't just one way to do localism.
Definitely not.
It changes and adapts depending on what a community needs.
Which keeps things interesting, right?
Definitely does. It's not about following some rigid set of rules.
It's about creating a world that's better for everyone. Fairer, more sustainable, the whole package.
Absolutely.
Going through all this about localism, there's one thing that really stuck with me.
It's the connection to religion, of all things.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about that.
It did seem a bit out of left field at first, but...
Then you start reading about the values of some of these religious groups.
And it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The research specifically mentioned some types of Christianity, right?
Right. Some branches of Christianity, like certain Baptist groups or the Churches of Christ, they really emphasize this thing called congregational autonomy.
Okay, break that down for me.
It basically means each local church gets to run itself. They're pretty independent, even from any larger structure.
So it's like each of those churches operates like its own little community.
Making their own decisions about their faith and how they want to do things.
Yeah, kind of like a mini version of localism, but within a religious context.
Exactly. And just like we've been talking about with localism in general,
Right.
there's not just one way to do it.
For sure.
Some groups are super strict about being independent, while others are more open to working with other churches.
It's interesting how we keep coming back to that need for, like, having control.
Whether it's about politics, economics, or even religion.
Like, people just want to have a say in how things work, especially when the world feels so complicated.
It's about wanting to belong, wanting to feel connected to something real, something you can understand.
And that's a big part of what makes localism so appealing, I think.
It does make you wonder if that's why we're seeing local everything these days.
The slow food movement, those CSAs,
Oh, yeah.
local breweries popping up everywhere you look.
People want that connection again.
People are craving something real, something authentic.
And localism gives them a way to tap back into that.
To not just be a consumer, but to actually be a part of something.
Absolutely. It's about being a part of the solution, right? Creating the world we want to see.
It's like taking that think globally, act locally idea,
Yeah.
but putting some real action behind it.
It's about realizing that the things we do, even in our own little corner of the world.
They actually ripple outwards. They have an impact.
So if we support local businesses, if we fight for our local environment,
We're not just doing something nice for our neighborhood.
that's bigger than that.
We're actually contributing to something much, much bigger.
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered so much ground today.
From farmers markets all the way to deep philosophical ideas about our place in the world.
Localism makes you think, that's for sure.
It really does. So for our listeners who are just now diving into all of this,
What's the one thing you hope they take away from this conversation?
more than anything, I want them to see that localism isn't just a passing trend.
It's a way of life.
It's a call to action. It's about getting involved in your own community right here, right now.
And realizing that you have the power to make a difference.
Because real change, it starts with each of us asking ourselves, what can I do today to make my community a little bit better?
Such a powerful question to end on. This is your host signing off for now, folks. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and remember, the future is local.